Now, I had the real pleasure of introducing the speakers today. About 50 years ago this spring, nearly 1,000 college students were preparing themselves to spend the coming summer in the state of Mississippi supporting the civil rights movement there. As most of you know, it was a dangerous time, it was a dangerous place. Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, said, "We called that summer a turning point for the entire generation," which I think is exactly right. We here at the university are commemorating that historical moment with several events, and this is one of them. Now that raises the obvious question: why would one invite an actor to commemorate an historical event? Well, the answer is that this is not your garden variety actor. Right? Miss Danny Glover was virtually born into a life of activism. His parents, both of them postal workers, were also both active in the NAACP. Referring to Freedom Summer, he once noted that Freedom Summer was the summer of 1964, that he graduated from high school in 1965, and so becoming active was almost a rite of passage for him. Living that out as an undergraduate at San Francisco State University, he was part of the 5-month strike there, still the longest strike at any university in American history. That strike led to the creation of the nation's first Black Studies program and its first school of ethnic studies. He has been an active supporter of unions and workers, including United Farm Workers, Workers United Union, the Service Employees Union. He has supported environmental initiatives and trying to call attention to the impact of global warming on poor countries, which is a part of his larger, more general advocacy for economic justice and access to health care and education programs in both the United States and Africa. For these efforts, Mr. Glover received a 2006 Directors Guild Award and a 2011 Pioneer Award from the National Civil Rights Museum. He has served as Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations Development Program for 6 years, focusing on issues of poverty, disease, and economic development in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He was a supporter of the Occupy movement. He has protested the war in Iraq and the humanitarian crisis in the Sudan. He serves on several nonprofit boards, including the board of directors of the Algebra Project, a math literacy project which is founded by members of the Mississippi movement who believe that quantitative illiteracy, mathematical illiteracy today, bars poor children from full participation in society in the same way that their inability to vote barred their grandparents from participating in the society 2 generations ago. One Algebra Project initiative with which Mr. Glover has been particularly associated involves a national movement calling for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would make quality public education a civil right, a constitutionally guaranteed right. Somewhere along the way, he has made a couple movies. I will mention only the Lethal Weapons mega series, Dreamgirls, The Color Purple, The Royal Tannenbaums, To Sleep with Anger, which he executive produced anytime you want, you know. Which he executive produced and for which he won an Independent Spirit Award for Best Actor. I will also mention Freedom Song, which I consider far and away the best Hollywood treatment of the civil rights movement. Nothing else is even close. In 2005, Mr. Glover co-founded Louverture Films, dedicated to the development and production of films of historical relevance, social purpose, commercial value, and artistic integrity. Now, to engage him in conversation, we really do have the perfect person. And as best we can figure, this is her first. Jacqueline Stewart is a brand new faculty member at the University of Chicago. I am pretty sure this is her first public event under that title, right, as this time around. All I will say in general is she's just a spectacular addition to this faculty and to this community. She is in the Department of Cinema and Media Studies in the college. Her specialties include an interest in activist film, as well as African American film cultures more generally. She directs the South Side Home Movie Project. She's curator of the Los Angeles Rebellion Preservation Project at UCLA. She serves as an appointee to the National Film Preservation Board. She is currently researching the racial politics of moving image preservation and is also completing a study of the life and work of African-American actor, writer, director Spencer Williams. She is the author of Migrating to the Movies, Cinema and Black Urban Modernity, which has achieved recognition from the Society for Cinema and Media Studies and the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. She has been awarded fellowships from Princeton University and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Ella Baker, certainly part of the animating spirit for at least the left wing of the civil rights movement in the 60s and well before that. She was asked once, how do you, she was active, she was an organizer in the 1920s, she was an organizer in the 1970s. And someone asked, how do you maintain an activist career for half a century? And her answer was, if people begin to place their values in terms of how high they get in the political world, or how much worldly goods they accumulate, or what kinds of cars they have, or how much they have in the bank, then that's where I begin to lose respect. To me, I'm a part of the human family. What the human family will accomplish, I can't control. But somewhere down the line, the numbers increase, the tribe increases. So how do you keep on? I don't claim to have any corner on an answer, but I believe the struggle is eternal. Somebody else carries on. Both of our speakers, for me, represent that tradition of somebody else carrying on, people who are doing their part in a long struggle. And so with great pleasure, let me introduce Mr. Glover and Professor Stewart.
Do you have a mic on? Testing. Do you have a mic on?
Sounds like we're on. Danny Glover is here. This is really exciting. I thought I had achieved some things, but I got more emails and phone calls about this event than anything else I've done at the university. So thank you. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's certainly an honor to be here. I want to thank you. And since we know each other through mutual friends, that's even better,
Yes.
Yeah. Mutual family.
Right.
We all family.
That's right.
It's even better.
Maybe we could start off talking about 1964. This is part of a program that's commemorating Freedom Summer 1964. If I take you back there, can you talk about the impact of that summer on you?
Well, I remember that summer specifically because it's also the year I graduated from high school in 1964. And for us, born and raised in San Francisco, and following day by day, minute by minute, what was happening in places like Mississippi and Alabama, whether it was the Freedom Rides, and following, in fact, we had a group in my high school that we would talk about. One group would be, denoted because they loved John Coltrane and everything else. There was a group of us who talked about that. There was a group of us who were athletes. Even though I looked like an athlete, I wasn't an athlete, but I was one of the part of that group. And the constant kind of watching and anticipation of it, of that. We knew all the names, all the people. I mean, my heroes, Bob Moses, Diane Nash, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Stokely Carmichael. You can go on and on and on. Those were people that I knew then, didn't know them, but knew of then long before I got an opportunity to meet some of them. And so for me, that whole period represented the articulation of being young, and the expression of my own rebelliousness. It's not that we had left ourselves and left Dr. King and the traditional civil rights movement, but these young people who were not too much older than us, in a sense, were doing something remarkable and represented that. And as I think about it, and imagine because Bob Moses is certainly one of the architects of Freedom Summer. And think about that moment where you have students from the North, and predominantly white students coming there, and the political impact that has. Think about that moment in the sense, they're going to the Deep South. This is not an experience they read about in the newspaper or get on the 6 o'clock news or something. They're going there. And the sons and daughters of those who are decision makers, those who can go to their congressman and say, wait a minute, my daughter's down there, my son's down there. That's a huge, that was an enormous, that was a sea change at that particular point in time. Whether we thought about that and all that, to be the ingenuity of it, the brilliance of it was there.
What about the fact that you were in San Francisco and the mix of influences, political influences that had on you coming up in the Bay Area at that time?
Well, you have to understand like the history of San Francisco, because it was the kind of bastion of this kind of, I think, progressive, when I say progressive politics. Remember, a year later, in 1965, we have the free speech movement at Berkeley with Mario Savio. And so, but before that, you know, I mentioned that I think about the great labor unions, the ILWU, number 11, which was not only, as we see in 1970, the first union to support boycotting South Africa. They refused to unload ships from South Africa in 1970, ILWU. That's lost in a historical translation. But also the fact that in 1934, and most of us who were kids growing up in San Francisco knew that Harry Bridges, a socialist from Australia, went around to all the black churches at that time. And he said during the major strike where not only was the U.S. Army out there, but also the National Guard was out there in this an extraordinary strike of union workers, of dock workers. And he went to the church and said, if you don't cross our picket lines, if you don't become scabs, I'll make sure that when we win the strike, and preface that when we win the strike, we will win, that black men will be on their dock. And I remember even before that I was able to go on when I was 16 or 17 years old. During the summer, I could use my Social Security card and work on the banana boats that were coming in.
Wow.
In the same sense, that's when you were still loading by hand. Well, all of us were done with that. But black men came to the dock as a result of that. So you take that to the strike on Auto Road in 1960. You take all this kind of activity that's happening there in San Francisco historically, kind of laid the foundation for my own growth, you know, and in some sort of, you know, subconscious way, it laid the foundation. And then my parents, of course. You know, my parents were active union members. They worked at the post office, the National Alliance of Postal Employees, and I'm sure there are many people in this audience right here who know about the National Alliance of Postal Employees and the picnics and the events they have, because their mothers or their fathers or their aunts and uncles worked at those. But that was a part of my acculturation, you know. And I remember I first learned about the Cuban Revolution when the local was celebrating, and I was 12 years old. The local was celebrating the victory of the Cuban Revolution, and Dave Johnson, the present local, used to wear a hat like Fidel around there. They used to call him Little Fidel. You know, those are the kind of things that, you know, impress you or have an impression on you, kid, and you begin to ask the questions then. So my parents established the context for the questions I began to ask myself as a young child, as I listened in surreptitiously to the conversation they had about what was happening with the union of this thing, or that thing, or that thing, and found a way in which when I learned how to type in the 7th grade, I used to type out the name pieces that go on the newsletter that you mail out. All those things were important parts of nurturing whatever was in me at that particular point in time. I was a kid who didn't have a lot of peer group pressure on that sense. I always had a job, so I always had a paper route. So in the morning when I delivered my papers at 4:30 in the morning, first thing I was doing was open up the paper, San Francisco Chronicle, and read and read what was happening in the paper before I started delivering my route. So those are the kind of things that I think were important for me in my early development, you know. And then in '66, when I came out to San Francisco State, I came out there at a moment when just as this evolution of it would be spoken word, but poetry that was happening out there. People like Reggie Lockett was there. I remember in the summer of 1966 listening to Reggie Lockett read. We were both the same age. Sonia Sanchez was out there at the time. There was this influx of students who had been a part, who had made their commitment with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, CORE, and other groups, and now we're coming back to college campus. And a number of them came to San Francisco State who had been out there. Jimmy Garrett was out there, a number of other people were out there who had been a part of SNCC and came there. So I had the benefit as a young, translating that and going through, making that transition rather, as a young child to a student, and always those dynamics that were happening in the civil rights movement were at the center of most of my, if not my public expression, certainly my concern as a young child and a young man, a young adult.
I mean, you mentioned a couple of poets. I know that Baraka was also an important figure for you. I'm wondering if we can talk about how creativity, how artistic practice becomes a part of what you do.
But it's the first thing, and then I knew of another poet that I read at the time, a young gentleman named Donnell Lee. I knew. He didn't know I knew who he was at that time and read his poetry back in 1966, 1967. But at the time, I'm sorry. But
is that, you all couldn't hear any of that?
You didn't hear any of that? Okay. How's everybody now? Can you hear? Okay, good.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
So, the thing was with the BSU, and I came to San Francisco State in the spring of 1967. And the BSU was very interesting because you had organizers. The people who had returned from organizing in the South, organizing voter registration, organizing, being part of Freedom Summer, had come back to school, and they were organizers. So the first thing they did on campus, San Francisco State College is a teacher's college. So they figured out one of the things was the most important. It had about 10 tutorial centers around the city. And these were work-study jobs for those men and women who were potentially going to be teachers. It also had because of the kind of liberal atmosphere of the school itself and tradition of the school, the BSU being very small demographically, was able to kind of gain control of the associated student budget. And basically, I mean, this is about organizing. I'm gonna tell you, that's what it's about, organizing. And we invited Amiri Baraka out to San Francisco State in the spring of 1967. And this was huge because at that time, Amiri Baraka was the voice of black arts. The work he had done in New York, he was the voice. And he had been out there before during the period of the Beat generation as a poet, but he'd come out there again, and he wanted to develop a community communication project. So his whole presence not only elevated the stature of the BSU and San Francisco State, it galvanized other artists around the Bay Area.
So communication meaning theater, writing?
It was theater. I remember the first production we did, How Do You Do, the Ed Bullens, Mad Heart, Amiri Baraka, Ben Caldwell, the first militant preacher. I did a play called, from Dorothy Ahmad called Father's Daughter. And several other plays, we did several other plays. Jajab, Ben Caldwell, those are the first productions that we did. In fact, we did that over in Oakland. And it was using poetry. At the time also, and at the time in 1966, 67, was the Black House. The Black House on Broadway. I mean, not Broadway, but on Broderick Street, right up there, just outside of the black community, where Eldridge lived in the Black House. Marvin X lived there, who wrote, and we also did his play, Flowers for the Trash Man. Marvin X lived there, Ed Bullens lived there, and we would have local, every Wednesday night there were local poets and writers who would come there, read poetry, or write, all those things were happening at the particular. Had that little space. It was the living room. It's an old Victorian home, an old home with a lot of space. So those are the kind of activities that were going on. Coupled with that was something unique, as I explained earlier during the brunch, that was happening in the black community, the traditional black community in San Francisco, and that's the Fillmore. The Fillmore was often referred to as Harlem West, back then in the day. And when the artists came there, major artists, whether it's the Duke Ellington Band, Count Basie, all the John Coltrane played in the Fillmore, Jimi Hendrix played in the Fillmore when he came there with Little Richard. All of them played in that area. That area had been designated for what I call Negro removal. So they called it redevelopment at the time. That's what it was termed. You know about it, but it was about moving. It was about it was Negro removal, and that was a thriving community, and men and women were organizing. Families were organizing to have a say in that removal, and out of that it was an extraordinary moment because it was not only cross-generational, it was also cross-ethnicity as well. So there were Japanese who were part of that movement. It were other people, Hispanics who were being part of that removal, who lived on the outskirts of that territory, and primarily African Americans. So the community came together in a huge way. And as students, we began to attach ourselves to that movement of what's happening. So as I was saying, the beautiful thing about San Francisco State was the idea that we were students, but we also learned, for me, but those who came and were there at the same time, learned that we could be organizers too. So our first attraction was to the community. And Amiri Baraka reinforced that with the Community Communication Project. So it was dance, poetry, it was theater. All those things were part of the process.
Why did that work well in your experience? Why did using the arts for political organizing and for raising consciousness, why do arts work in that process?
Well, the beautiful thing about, and this is a part of Amiri's philosophy and the one that we adopted as well, and so many other artists at the time, that people begin to see their own images. When you do plays, when people begin to see themselves and begin to laugh at themselves, be kind of self-reflect and everything else, it's a whole other kind of relationship that you have with an audience, And that's the one thing that I learned when I began doing Fugard. Ethel Fugard, the great South African playwright, which I made my signature, in my theatrical career was the signature thing from 1975 that I focused on Fugard.
Master Harold and the Boys. Maybe you want to talk about some of the plays.
I'm sorry?
Some of the plays that you did.
Some of the plays that I did with Ethel Fugard was The Blood Knot, Caesar Banzi is Dead, The Island, Bozeman and Leanna, and Master Harold and the Boys, which I did on Broadway. But all of that, I knew the importance of language, but also the importance of people being drawn into the story and allow themselves to have some sort of self-reflection, self-images, images of themselves and everything else. And I found that to be, that's what I learned most from that period, working with Amiri Baraka in that community communication program. He only stayed out there a semester. Then the next semester in the fall, we brought Nathan Hare out, because that's when we began to talk about starting a Black Studies program. And mind you, I use the word Black Studies program because we didn't see the image, we didn't see the possibilities of an ethnic studies program, School of Ethnic Studies, but a Black Studies program. We brought Nathan Hare out there, and Nathan Hare was at Howard University, came up from Howard University. Again, that was because we had our hands or had a lot of influence in terms of the student budget and everything else, and do some of the things.
Can we talk about movies for a little bit? Talk about movies a bit? because you've made a lot of them. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, you were just talking about the power of the arts, and you were really talking about the liveness of poetry, of theater. And I wonder what your thoughts are as an actor, but also as a producer, about the possibilities of film in terms of raising consciousness.
Boy, I tell you, I mean, that's where it is. We could do so much for film, with film. The possibilities are just, I mean, I just find extraordinary with film. When we formed Louverture Films 10 years ago, a friend and a great, I mean, just really an extraordinary co-producer, Jocelyn Barnes. And we wanted to focus on several things, including focus on, as stated through our objective, you know, films and relevant films and everything else. But we wanted to focus on also young filmmakers, and especially women as well, and support women. And it was interesting because this young Senegalese woman that she received an award. She just reproduced. She had a small film. She's just getting an opportunity. And excuse me, my name, because it's kind of late. That day's kind of late. But we were able to help her and involved in getting her film done and getting there. But my experience with film quickly, and probably when I was 17 years old, 18 years old in high school, was to watch foreign film. And it's interesting, and maybe because I struggled so much often in reading, and there was some of the kind of world and something that I saw in foreign film. So I would watch foreign films from all over the world. I saw Senor Ray, the great Indian film, Kurosawa, and all those films when I was very, very young. Just watching film. Not no interest in being an actor or being involved in film, but watching film in itself. But when I got to watching the film of Jibril, Usman Sabeni, you know, Suleiman Sisi, all those kind of the great filmmakers, you know, African filmmakers who come out of, I mean, when I saw Black Girl, it just, whew, and I knew how powerful film and realized how powerful it could be as a tool for my own enrichment and own growth in itself, seeing the world, Come Back Africa, you know, Mary McCabe, Come Back Africa, when I saw that. All these films that I remember early on. And then I remember there's a brother named Clyde Taylor. He lives in San Francisco, man. He's retired now from NYU. Clyde Taylor used to have an African film festival, you know, in San Francisco. So we had the opportunity to bring all these different films and films in at a particular time in the early 70s as well. But the power of film and the use of film for even the company that we've worked, the work we've done in terms of, and I can talk about those films because that's the ones I'm most proud of. I'm just not saying anything derogatory about the films I've been able to do in the business and everything else, but films like The House I Live In, you know, about the war on drugs. I mean, it starts this whole revelation and conversation. I went to an event in Newark, and at a church in Newark, and there was somewhere in the neighborhood, I must have been close to 500 people, and every part of the drug scenario, the drug narrative, from grandmother who has to take care of the baby, grandchildren, for the brothers who are just out from incarceration, to all those people who are part of that whole chain of existence in terms of drug, where they are talking about it. All of them there were sitting in the same place, understanding a little bit more about themselves, their relationship to what had happened to them, and trying to find ways, using that as a platform to find ways in which they can rebuild and regenerate a new life and everything else. Those are the kind of things that I saw with film. Or Bamako. When we did Bamako on a movie on the African debt crisis, it's all in subtitle. There's no English in it. There's only French and Bombada. And they were all in subtitles. The World Bank wanted to meet, after they saw the film, they wanted to meet with the filmmaker, Abdurrahman Sasako, and suggested he's changed some stuff in the film, and he didn't meet with them. But that's the power of it. Or the fact that when people who worked at NGOs and worked in civil service and worked overseas, they know the story. They know the truth of the story. They know the images that you see within the film. They become a part of their lives. And that's the power of it. And that's a narrative. That was a narrative, not a documentary. We have a film that's going to come out that we're doing with Naomi Klein called, you know, the title, it was definitely called, is about global warming and climate change, you know, and the title of it we have now is This Changes Everything. And it's not a doomsday thing that we often see about what's going to happen here, what's going to happen there, and what's going to happen there. But it's a film about what people are doing in their communities around the world, in China, in India, in places around the world, and where organically, democratically changing the nature of their relationship to the planet and the relationship to each other as well. You know, and you think about that, you know, you think about the numbers, 75 to 80% of the damage that is done because of global warming is going to be suffered by those people who are the poorest. Those are the ones who are going to be affected by it. You know, you take for Africa around 22 of the 53 African countries, 40% of the African countries are the most endangered index in terms of global warming. There's places in north of Maputo, 2,000 kilometers north of Maputo, who are not talking about how do we reverse what's happening, how do we evacuate what's happening. Those are the kind of things that bring home. Those are the kind of things that the power of film being able to bring people's consciousness to another place, you know, whether through narrative, and we've seen through narrative. I was here in January of 1986 when I almost couldn't get out of the city because of playing Mister in The Color Purple. So, and all the discussion about The Color Purple. I remember Minister Farrakhan would say, he had a DVD, or no, an audio, he would say, The Color Purple. And then he'd say a few moves in there, The Color Purple. But yeah, I mean, that's why I do this, you know. I mean, I get an opportunity to do, someone just gave me a couple of scripts that are very fascinating, that I think they're going to be important in the discourse and dialogue about what affects our lives, you know.
I wanted to ask you about that, about when you're choosing projects to be a part of in the mainstream industry, right? I mean, you have to sort of calibrate what some of your own convictions and priorities are in relationship to the work that doesn't always manifest itself, right?
Well, you know, in the early part of my career, I was very fortunate. You know, I mean, my first major role was Places in the Heart. And I was told I was going to do that role the same day that my mother died in an automobile accident. So I had an opportunity in that film to dedicate my work to my very first love, you know, my mom. And I had that as a vehicle. In fact, I don't know, I mean, it was her, the memory of her, my love of her that got me through that film, because I was just devastated. Me and my father, every one of us, me and my dad, we were just devastated over the loss of her. Then I had you know, I worked with some great directors like Peter Weir and Witness. And then I did Silverado. I mean, who's going to argue about a black heroic cowboy, you know? And the funny, it's just show you the power of film. When Silverado was released, I was in San Francisco in the Fillmore area, the black community. But three gentlemen came up to me, saw me walking down the street, passed by and walked me, He said, hey, man, you the guy that was in that Western. And they didn't even know my name. You the guy who was in that Western we just saw. And I said, yeah, yeah. Hey, man, you know what we liked about these three young black men? We liked the fact that you knew how to take care of yourself. I hadn't thought about that when I said, this is what they would be able to digest from the film and bring to their own life, that this guy, this character, this creation, you know, he was able to take care of himself. Or when I did Buffalo Soldiers for TNT, you know, I wanted to do a story about Buffalo Soldiers. And we had gone to HBO, and the writer couldn't make it happen and everything else. And so Carolyn McDonald, sister who ran my company at the time, ran into my man who owns TNT, the guy, TBS, Ted Turner. Ran into him at a conference and said, Danny Glover wants to do a movie on Buffalo Soldier. He said, Danny Glover wants to be a movie on Buffalo Soldier? I got a Buffalo Soldier grave on a piece of my land. Let's go do it. We did everything that we wanted. This is another example of the power of film. We did every single thing that we wanted in that film. We created the story we wanted to create it. We created the moral dilemma we wanted to create. We created the emotional, what I call emotional danger. You know, here we have on the one side a black Seminole Indian who has a whole nother history and whole nother history of resistance to oppression and everything else, and a black top sergeant freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And we created the emotional tension we wanted there, emotional danger there. And then we created the outcome, every single part of that. The first thing we wanted to see, the first thing you see is the soldiers coming over to the horizon, traditional Westerns to save the day, you know. And because they're black, that didn't mean nothing. They knew how to use guns too. You know what I'm saying? The first thing we want, the first image you saw, here they come on the white horse, and they come down there. The buck stops here, right now. We don't care who you are. The buck stops here. We have authority here. So we wanted to create authority, which they did have authority in the real West. They wasn't scratching their heads in the real West. They had the authority. You know what I'm saying? That's the first thing we want to do. We want to create that. Then we want to create the danger. So here comes this black Seminole Indian who has his own kind of reverence, and people, Carl Lumley was brilliant in that, wonderfully in that, and played that. And he comes there, and he basically is the top scout. Everybody depends on him. And if you know the history, after the Emancipation Proclamation, black Seminole Indians who had fled over the Rio Grande and worked for the Santa Ana government came back and were Army scouts, scouts for the Texas Rangers right after the Emancipation Proclamation. So that's part of history. And there's plaques all over Texas, southern part of Texas, southeast Texas, about black Seminole Indian scouts. So we created that. Then we created the tension right there and all the other kind of energy. Here's one man who lives in two worlds. That is a Native American heritage, Native American culture and everything else. Here's another one, in the singular world. And then we have the conflict. 2 days, about a week after it aired on TNT, we get a call in our office from the great-great-granddaughter of an Apache chief. And she says that that story that we created through our own use of our own power of imagination actually happened, and they would tell the story around the campfire, where art meets reality. That's the possibility you have with film. So you create, because you decide what are the values that I want to uphold, what are the relationships that I want to recreate. What did Paul Robeson say? It's not enough for an artist to create reality as it is. He has to create, an artist's responsibility is to create the reality that he can imagine, the relationships we can imagine. That's what he said. And that's what it is. That's what we have the possibility to do. Very often we don't do it. It doesn't happen in the industry.
Yes, it seems like that's pretty rare.
But it's pretty rare to happen. But we had the opportunity to control. I was the executive producer. I had found the script writer I wanted to find. She said, this is what we want. This is how we want to tell the story. The director and everything else. And we told her exactly what we want. And it was one of the most successful pieces of work that TNT had. It allowed me to do Freedom Song. Once I did that, I was wanting to come back and do Freedom Song, which I had received as a script about, and this Weinstein company was going to do it, but the money fell through. And we were trying, I kept tracking the script, trying to figure out when it was going to happen, because I thought it was, for me, it's an important story. It was important for me. And so I kept tracking it and tracking it and tracking it, and then we found out that it was open in space. And so after I went to Irish Grossman, who was head of programming at TNT at the time, and Buffalo Soldier was successful, so I said, I have something else for you. And we were able to do that.
How do you feel about black filmmaking today? People were really celebrating the last year as a year where there was a significant number of films by and about black folks that did well. 12 Years a Slave, Fruitvale Station, The Butler. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on the possibilities for doing the kind of work that you're talking about in Hollywood now.
Well, this is hard to say, you know. And I'm saying this because I don't sit up here on the stage and judge the choices that people make. I know from my own experience, when I saw 12 Years a Slave, I was numb. I had to go back to see it. I had never seen anything like that before. And I went down. I'm going down to see him next week for Mother's Day. My mother has 3 first cousins. One's 90, one's 92, one's 93. I went down to see them and to talk to them about their grandmother, who I vaguely remember when I was sick on the farm when I was 6 months old to 3 years old. I spent 2 years living with my I was born in San Francisco, but I lived with my grandparents on the farm, rural farm in Georgia. And Mary Brown was born in 1853. She was 90-some years old when I was there. She was born in 18, she was a healer. And I had to go down there and just record some of their feelings, thoughts, what do they remember about Mary Brown? If they're saying, that, for me to go in to see a movie and to want to do that shows you just how powerful the what's going on and how much we want to tell. What is the story about this? What are the kind of things that we want to remember? And it's scary. Now, maybe we can go back and look at Beloved in a different kind of way after seeing 12 Years a Slave. Because we handled that, because I think that people were scared of that, all of that. Because there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of pain. All of that's part of our psychic history, our emotional history, all that pain and all that. So the only way we deal with the pain is to confront it, you know? And when I was preparing for Beloved, I would go, I had my Beloved room in my house, and I had all the pictures. I had Frederick Douglass' biography. I had pictures all over my walls and stuff like that. And I go in the room, I get overwhelmed. And I sit in the room and start crying. And I get in the room, I can't stay in there. And sometimes I fall asleep in the room just to fall asleep, just to kind of immerse myself in that. Just to kind of, in a sense, live in it and try in my most feeble way, my most limited mind and heart to be in there in that moment. And that's painful. It's been painful that. We have to recognize that. But when I remember when I was looking, you know, when you're looking at a movie, you drop your popcorn on the floor, and you don't even go down to pick it up. It stays on. I'm looking at the movie like it. That's what happened to me when I saw that movie. That's the kind of movie. I mean, that's. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the choices that are made. There are 15 men who make the decision about what we see in the world, and I'm gonna say thank Brad Pitts, who had a relationship saying, Paramount, I made all this money for you. I want to do this. I want this to see. We'd have never heard about this if it hadn't been for him. It would never got the kind of wide release it has been. And we can't depend on that. We had to find another way of distribution, another way in which we can't depend upon Brad Pitt. And bless Brad Pitt. You know what I'm saying? But the question is does that become just an anomaly? Has this become something that we can build on, something else we can say? Because we only go through the course of healing, and the process is healing and transformation. The two words go inseparable, healing and transformation. If we confront these, we confront this. So many things, so many ways of doing, so many ways happen in our lives, you know, our relationships, gender relationships, about healing and transformation. They have to be grounded in that. They have to be situated in that for us to kind of move on, not only as we as African Americans, but we as human beings as well.
Yes, beautiful. I mean, what you're saying really raises the question about how to engage young people in the kinds of questions and debates and that process of facing history and confronting it, and ways that we need to develop to do that. And I wonder if maybe you could address that in relation to your own experiences in the student protest movement.
Oh, man, look here, I've been having some great fun. I've been traveling around with a group of young people for the last year. Students, who call me, remind me of when I was 20, 21, 20, with students right here. And I've been working on a campaign with the UAW around auto workers in Canton, Mississippi at Nissan. I was here in Chicago. We were at, we were at the university. I'm trying to think downtown. I just can't think of it. Huh? Columbia University. We had Columbia College. We had Columbia College. We had a spoken word, jam supporting these workers. So we Skyped the workers in, people, and the techniques of information and disseminating information, are so amazing. What they did was incredible. So we had some workers chime in. We had a spoken word contest, and there were about, I would say there were about 250 students there. And all of them were tweaking and putting that stuff on social media and everything else. And then watch that, and to watch them, well, 7 of those students from Tougaloo sat in at a sit-in just a couple of weeks ago at Nissan in Canton, Mississippi, and a brother who had been fired sat in and talked about the main motto is workers' rights are civil rights. Workers' rights are civil rights. And they sat in there, and the brother got his job. Nissan hired him back with all his back pay and everything else, who had been fired. What does that remind you? Watch young people, or just to the Astor, who is in the audience. Look what he's done. Look what he's been doing. Or Emmanuel over at the fish farm. Look at the things that they're doing. Training and watching this process. I was talking earlier about going to a high school in this area outside of San Francisco, and going in there further and further, and I came in there, the high school, the Palestinian students there, Mexican students, African American students. I saw at least 2 women who looked like they could have been from Somalia. They're Chinese students, and I knew Chinese, probably Vietnamese students and everything. And I watched them, and what was impressive to me, and there were two young girls. They looked like they were 12 to me at the most, 13, but they said they were sophomores and everything. They had started, written a letter, had written an article / letter talking about the derogatory use of language toward women, the B word, the W word and everything else and all that. And it had started a conversation around the school. There was a really dynamic conversation. And these two young little sisters, I say they were so articulate and so passionate and so committed to what they believe in changing that word. Because they get called that all the time at 13, 14, 15 years old. And they've got that. That's the kind of stuff that I see and I've watched and I'm excited about in terms of young people. And, you know, one of my heroes, you know, he's around young people all the time, you know, because he came up around people who took him under. Harry Belafonte, who Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois took him under their wings. You know what I'm saying? And he's around here taking young people under his wings, working with people around the issues around the prison industrial complex, doing all the particular things. And we can only learn from that. But I get excited by the work that I see young people doing on the ground, real work, real questions, all in these places that we've forgotten about. But they have not forgotten about who they are and reimagining their lives. I was at I did a couple of benefits for the World Institute for Disability, WID, and I remember John Hockenberry, I think that's how I pronounce his name, the paraplegic who's a reporter as well. He told a story about being in Somalia at the height of the conflict in his wheelchair and everything else. And he was confronted by 3 young kids in there, and they pointed these automatic rifles at him and kept talking to him. He didn't understand what they were saying, and he didn't respond. So the kids left, and they gathered among each other and started talking again. Started talking. And then they came back to them, and John said, "They want my wheelchair." His thing was they wanted his wheelchair, and he went and said to them, "You can't have my wheelchair. I need my wheelchair." So they wanted the wheelchair for one of their comrades, perhaps, because they were in the process of rebuilding their world, or recreating their world. So they wanted the wheelchair. They wanted to take his wheelchair in order for them to rebuild the world. And that's what happens. Young people had a capacity to rebuild out of the ashes, out of the muck and everything else, had the capacity to reimagine and rebuild. And that's what we have to support in every way which we can, you know.
It's so encouraging to hear you talk about young people in a positive way. That doesn't happen enough. So thank you for that.
I mean, I was invited at the San Francisco State some years after. I was invited to come out there and give the commencement address. So I get a call in my office that the new Black Student Union wants to meet with you. So I said, okay. And so I get there and they say, "Well, Mr. Glover, with all due respect, sir, we understood what you did in the past, and we celebrate that and honor what you did in the past. We got a problem with the president here, and we don't think you should show up to do the commencement address." And I said, "Well, you know, I think it could be, you know how we get older, we get rational, you know, we get." And I said, "Well, I think what we should do is I can use this as a moment to express specifically what your objectives are and everything else, and use that in my speech." He said, "We don't think you should show up." And I sat around and looked at them, and all of a sudden, they reminded me of myself. And I said, "Well, I guess I don't show up." But there's a great scene in a movie Marlon Brando did called Viva Zapata. If you ever seen that, it was written by the script was written by John Steinbeck. There's a great scene in there where Zapata is taking on this role and everything else. He's become this revolutionary. He's now settled into being a bureaucrat and everything else. And then and there's a scene in the movie where a group of peasants who reminded him of himself 10 years ago, 15 years ago, prior to this, come up to him and tell him the same problems that he's faced, the same problems and everything else. And he started arguing with him, and then he says, he takes a moment, he gets up, he grabs his rifle and his man, "Let's go." I'm with you, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, the fact is that there's so many incredible ideas, and I run across it just as these young men and women, and I've watched over the last year, working on this campaign, not only I've seen the workers themselves take steps. I'm talking about Mississippi. You know, if you don't have this job, you could be working at McDonald's or Burger King or someplace else, getting minimum wage. And they said that we deserve more. We're entitled to more. And to watch them grow and to watch the students grow and their acceptance and the relationship grow has been pretty amazing.
So let's open this up for some questions. We have 2 microphones, and I think, right, Tracy? One here. Where's the second one? Back there. So if you can come up, make your way to one of the microphones. How many minutes do we have? Oh. We have about 15 minutes, so we want to get to as many questions as we can. If you could just keep your question brief so that we can hear from as many people as possible, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Grover, I can't help but notice the irony that we are here to commemorate a movement of students that were fighting for their rights, and still you support the Venezuelan dictatorship that is nowadays assassinating and imprisoning Venezuelan students that are fighting for their rights. So how can we mix those two? And also, if you could answer what happened with the $28 million of Venezuelan taxpayer money that has seemed to disappear and that were given to you. Thank you.
You know, with all due respect, sir, at every event that I'm at, whether I was at with Angela Davis, and we have to hear this out, and I'll take my time to say this, that the first question that comes at for the last half dozen events is someone who has some false, imagined lie about what's happening. Let me finish. I'll let you say your question. I've let you say your question. Just hold on. Lie about what's happening in Venezuela. And I unapologetically say that Hugo Chavez was a friend of mine. I have Hugo Chavez is my friend. I've been to Barlovento. You ever been to Barlovento? You ever been to Barlovento? Okay, you live in Barlovento. Have you been in the black community in Barlovento? Have you been around black people in Barlovento, and you asked them about the Bolivarian Revolution and the impact that it's had on their lives from the coca? Yes, that's the real story. The real story is that he's provided free education. How about some free education here? How about some free education for college students? The real story is that he's provided health care. The real story is that there's been a literacy program. All the things that have been absent. That's the real story. So here's what it's saying. Here's what's happening here in Venezuela. There's always been an attempt to destabilize it. You know, it is stabilized. The National Endowment for Democracy is part of the State Department. It puts all this money out here for all this. Who controls the press in Venezuela? The wealthy. They've been controlling and they have from the So let's see what's happening. Read the count. Go to CIPRA and Mark Weisbrach and read his articles. Now, I've known Mark because I'm on his board, the CIPRA. I've known Mark for so long. He's advised not only the government in Korea, he's advised the government in Brazil as an economist in various areas. And he's advised about government in Venezuela and other governments, in Peru as well. Go to his website and look at the story of what has happened in terms of this. A woman who comes out to move the litter after tires have been burned in her community, in this contested community. Notice that all the things that you see in this community are not in the poor communities, they're in the middle class communities. And all this, and watch them, and a woman is shot in the head when she gets to she moves it. It's all over the press, man. All you have to do is read it in anywhere else. The New York Times has even said there have been more people killed. There have been people who work with the tourist industry who've been assassinated by those quote-unquote protesters and everything else. So don't come up with me with that stuff. I have a different story. You have a narrative you want to believe, okay? I have a narrative because I've been to Venezuela for the first time in 2003. 2003, not to get some money. That's another lie that's going around. I had a woman in a restaurant confront me about getting $8 million to do the movie on Toussaint Louverture. And so I said, let me explain. This is the problem with this. I said, and I'll go back to it. I said, let me explain to you. The agreement that we made was this, that the government was putting up $18 million if I could come up with the $12 million. The money would never be accessed if I could not come up with the $12 million. I never came up with the $12 million. I never got 1/4 from the Venezuelan government. That's the lie. That is the lie. I never got 1/4 from the Venezuelan government. And that's the truth. And you can say that. So whatever it is. And this woman got in an argument with me, and I said, well, you're not listening to me. You're not listening to me. I said the only way the money would have been accessed, the $18 million for a $30 million film, was me to get the $12 million that I would raise in private equity. If I didn't raise the money, then the money would never be accessed. The money was never accessed. So they promote the lie. There's a lie about Danny Glover getting $18 million or $8 million or whatever the number is. But that's the lie, and they believe it. They sit around their house looking at the same information, looking at the same footage, looking at all the same thing, and they begin to believe that stuff. So that's the truth. Every single time for the last half dozen events I've been in, the first person who comes up and asks me a question is someone about Venezuela.
Let's take the next question.
We're going to go here.
So get the facts straight, okay? You don't have your facts straight. He's the first one in line. And as soon as I saw him, I said, watch this. Go ahead, let's go.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Glover.
And now he's leaving. He doesn't have. He didn't come to hear anything I had to say. He didn't have any importance in the film. He wanted to ask that one question.
Good evening, Mr. Glover, and thank you for coming. I have a comment and a request. My comment is with regards to you being an elder statesman, if you will, with regards to the African American artistic community. I look at your generation, which will soon be my generation. Mr. Washington.
It's a little
Mr.
hard.
Lindo, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Lindo, Mr. Washington, Mr. Belafonte. I'm looking at, of course, the aging of historic African American actors that have made a significant contribution to our art and to our history. Is there anything afloat? So that's my comment. I want to thank you for that. And I'm noticing again the aging of actors that have done very well in Hollywood and the new actors that are coming up. Would it be possible, when I think about the formation of the United Artists, when I think about Kirk Douglas starting his own studio, Oprah Winfrey, it was to perpetuate and to produce movies and items that would be of interest to our communities. Is there anything afloat with regards to all of you guys coming together, pooling your resources and coming up with a combined Black United Artists production company? Because I would love to see both the continuity, perpetuation, and the continuation of our art forms. Thank you.
Not to be sarcastic, it's a beautiful idea. I think that I mean, we look at the choices that we make, and we make the choices by the kind of work that we want to do. And I'm not saying that my choice, the work that I try to do with my film, whether it's Trouble the Water, the movie on New Orleans, or other films that I do, merit any more consideration to be made than other films. I don't think that's possible. I mean, there may be other relationships that may happen out of that, and you may find an opportunity to find some sort of co-partnership on one particular project. But the question becomes, in essence, what is the distribution? What are the issues around? There's the big major issues around distribution and distributing film, you know. And for instance, all the time that we were trying to get foreign sales estimates, remember this word, foreign sales estimates, for the movie on Toussaint, we couldn't get it because supposedly we didn't have any comparables. Now, it's not comparable to Hotel Rwanda. It's not comparable to Dreamgirls. A movie on the Haitian Revolution is not comparable. But those are the only ways in which they were able to see. They couldn't see that maybe the comparable was Braveheart, Mel's picture, or maybe the comparable was Gandhi, or maybe the comparable was Lawrence of Arabia. Some of that, maybe that was the comparable, you know, in that sense. But that's his whole issue. Getting money and funding is because of that. And the cost of making a film. The film that I was trying to make, which I didn't get $18 million from, the film that I was trying to make about the Haitian Revolution, if I was able to do this film at a studio, and the studio would probably cost me $80 million, $90 million. I found a way in which we can do this movie, given the relationship that we have, given that if I did the movie in Venezuela, then I would have a lot of economies of scale. I would have helicopters. I would have my own cavalry that we would get at a certain place, you know, and then I would have other economies of scales that I could use in making the film. But on the one hand, it would be so expensive. And the other thing is that people stare you in the face and say, man, I like that idea. But they know with the cost of the film, expense of the film, plus the P&A and all that stuff, that it was something that you couldn't do under this particular system.
Let's go over here, Haki.
Yeah, my question was going to be about Toussaint. But let me just say that in answering this young man's, I thought, very inappropriate question, he didn't mention Cuba. The foreign policy of this country has been against Cuba ever since Fidel came in. Chavez and Fidel were close, and he received medical treatment there. And of course, from Cuba, he sent over doctors and educators to Venezuela. So that's kind of connection. But so the foreign policy of this country, if the nations do not tap dance to what these people want them to do, then all the press goes against them, and whether it's true or not, you see. And so you're being, and you know, it's the truth. I mean, it's a very negative foreign policy.
Well, you know, the most dynamic region in the world right now is Latin America. And make no mistake about it. And that's the whole historical process. The U.S. has had control of this region, or basically dictated what happened in this region since the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. And that's what has happened in terms of determining what's happening. So what has been expressed has been from the bottom up in terms of what I would call popular democracy, a new grassroots participatory democracy from the bottom up. And you see that. You could go to Barlovento in Venezuela, and you can see the projects. And I mentioned the word about some politicians earlier, a couple of aldermen here earlier, political projects. I was in Barlovento, and we were swarmed. And Barlovento is primarily, in areas of it, is Afro-descendants. You know, descendants of the slave trade, system slave. So people don't think about Venezuela when we think about that, but there are a considerable number of Afro-descendants there. And they had established, I had gone there on the 8th of October of 2012, after the election. And then I was amazed at how people were celebrating not only the election, or re-election of their president, but they were also talking about the projects that they were involved in, the banana cooperatives, the chocolate cooperatives, and all the other kinds of things that happened. When I first met President Chavez in 2003, he says, you know, in the 1990 Constitution, we looked out for indigenous people, we looked out for women, but we didn't look out for Afro-descendants. And we have to do something about that. What are the political projects? Do something about that. So he said, look at me, look at my hair. You know, look at my lips, man. My grandmother was African. You know what I'm saying? I don't look like this for a reason, so I know it's important. Venezuela opened more consulates and embassies in Africa, with African nations, during that brief period of time than it ever been before. Relationships. They appointed a young Afro-descendant brother named Boulevard, last name Boulevard, to head that. And he's the head of foreign policy in terms of Africa, in terms of that. So on the one hand, I saw political projects, whether it be the healthcare, whether it be literacy, whether it be education, whether it be these economic engines, cooperatives that drive people's lives, whatever those particular things were happening, and there were real things that were happening. That's what the problem was. How do you be called a dictatorship when you have 20 elections in the course of 10 years or something like that, and you win 19 of them? You know, how do you call it this whole idea? So fixated in the dictatorship of what did Jimmy Carter say about the elections in Venezuela? And this is in print. He said it was the best run elections in history. Over 80% of the people, 80% of the eligible voters voted, and there was such transparency. If you went through the process, there were 6 different ways, different processes where you were verified. Your name was verified on the voter registration list. That's the reality of it. But the people he wants to come here, the first thing he wants to promote a lie. And we have to tell a lie. King used to always quote Carlyle, no lie lasts forever.
We got about 10 more minutes left, so I'm going to try to get 2 more questions in.
I'm sorry.
I just want to say, you see all these people out here? We just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to be real quick and follow up Haki with that. And my simple question, are you in the habit of making women cry? Because your passion, your heart, your dedication has given me an expatriate who's recently come back to the United States hope again. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. I'm Dr. Richard J. Gardner, Sr., and I'm a biology adjunct professor at Al-Harvey College. I brought one of my young mentees with me. Josh, would you stand up, please? And I wanted to ask you, because I was taken by your relationship to the student movement, and first of all, I can't help but notice that button on your lapel. And I have one at home too. Black Panther Party, 1968 here in Chicago. And I remember being in the courtroom when Bobby Seale was on trial downtown. My question to you is, getting young people involved in the movement, and you spoke about your experience with that group, The House I Live In, and you spoke about how they were rebuilding their lives. And so now we have a problem here, especially with young black men, and how desperate they are to find themselves and to stop the violence. And so, yes, I believe that the film and that sort of creativity will help people identify themselves and look at their images. But I want to ask you, from your experience in 1964, graduating from high school, how can you translate that to the students we have now? I mean, especially young students in urban areas.
Let me say this real quick, and I'll say this because I think some of the work that we have to do, you're going to be able to identify that work. Because we can't, the process is 24/7. Whatever we find, I got a 10-year-old grandson, no father. And I know it. I don't know what it means. I try to figure it out. I was in love with my father. My father was my best friend. When I was in it, I think about him now. I laugh at him. When I think about it, he's been gone now. But, I'm trying to, how do I wrestle with this? This anger and all of that. And I got 2 years. I got a 2-year window. I was telling somebody, I got a 2-year window. We got to work on some stuff to reverse some stuff to be able to be there. I'm going to New York now. We got to talk, because I had to say that your mama's here, she does what you do, but I need you to get bigger than you are. You got to be bigger. You know, we got to tell our young black men that who they are or who they think they are, they're much bigger than that. They're much larger than that. We got to find a way to, they have much more possibility than that. And I'm just telling him that, I was telling him when I was listening to him read, man, here's a month, I'm having trouble in school, walking out of the school, causing his brother in school, man. I was saying, listening to him read a book that I had bought him, man. And I said, man, when I was 10 years old, I had trouble getting through Curious George. And look how well you read. Look how smart you are. You know, we have to really take a hand and then hold them and everything else and keep holding them, you know. I don't know, that's part of the answer. That's part of the answer. Institutions have a role to play. I came up with, in 1964, there are a lot of institutions around there. My grandmama was at my high school graduation. She just happened to take the bus across Georgia. There was a lot of places. There were things to think about. There were other people, other examples. I wasn't trying to be a rapper, thinking I could be a rapper, as most of us are giving a big thing, I'd be a basketball player. I wanted to be like those people who were in SNCC. I wanted to be like those young other people. We had to create another kind of narrative and scenario, embracing them, enveloping them, and everything else, touching them, you know. And we got to start it, not wait until they're in trouble, but before that it has to be unsaid. Because I'm talking to them and saying, I got my boy's 10. I got 2 more years. We got to get it right now. You know, I was talking to his tutor. We got to get it out. We have to work double overtime now. And he's coming from a grandson who can take him where he wants to. A grandfather who can take him where he wants to go, do this and everything else. You can buy him everything and everything. That ain't what it is. It's not the things you give him. It's what you invest him with in his soul. That's it. Thank you.
So we have time for one last question.
I just wanted to ask you a question about Trans-Africa. Nicole Lee just stepped down. I wanted to find out what the process of getting a new president, how long will it be, and where you're looking, inside and outside the Trans-Africa Forum.
There's several things that happen, and I'm going to be very brief with this. You know, Nicole, who has been absolutely wonderful for the last year. I'm the chairman of the board of Trans-Africa Forum. And Nicole has been there and has been staunch, and our problem is resources. And one of the major supporters of Trans-Africa has been unions. Whether it's SCIU has been important, 1199 with George Gresham has been important to us. Before that, there've been other, but they've been the very big supporters of us. We did work here. And Citgo Oil gave us money, et cetera, et cetera. So what I think is important to understand is that what is Trans-Africa in the 21st century? We're going to hold up, and we're going to have, big signage of all the work that we've done in the past, and all the major stuff that we've done, whether it's Haiti or South Africa, apartheid, whatever. What do we do in the 21st? What are the relationships, and where do we find the work that is happening? And I think that's the process that we're going to go through for some time after this. We're going to go through this with the library, the information, the Trans-African Library is going to be available, but we're going to take some time to go through a process of figuring out what do we want to do. 150 million people live in the African descendants live in the Southern Hemisphere. What is the relationship that we have with them? How do we find out the work that we need to do with civil society in Africa? What are the issues that we face within in terms of women in all places in his? Where are the kind of questions that we had to answer and begin to filter out? And that's not going to be the board of directors that's sitting around trying to make that decision. We're going to come to communities and talk about Trans-Africa and talk about that and have some input, so we can figure out that when we start off and we begin up, which we are, that we're going to have the marching orders that we need.
I'm going to take the organizer's prerogative and add one more question, because we've been talking a lot about young people, but we haven't heard from any. So I'm going to have this young man ask the last question.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Noel from Donda's house. I wanted to ask in terms of acting, do you have any rituals when it comes to memorizing scripts or even like when it comes to stuff like that? Because I believe it could be used for more than just memorizing scripts. Because I know it takes excessive focus, you know?
Well, it's the first. This makes this a good session. It's the first acting question I got. But one of the things, I'm going to show you my own lesson. There's certain problems, there's certain challenges with acting, with always. So some people can look at a page and memorize a page. I've always had trouble with exposition. You know, I remember when I did a movie called Grand Canyon, and I had about 3 pages where I'm just talking for almost 3 pages. So I could sit down and memorize that stuff. What I did was I went down to the Grand Canyon, and I actually did what I was talking about. I went down the Cayuga Trail for 6.5 miles, stayed 2 nights down there, and then came back up the Bright Angel Trail, which is 7.5 miles up. So I actually did it. So the context of what I was working on and what I had to memorize, I had now as a part of my consciousness because I had done it. Now that's an extreme. Okay, I want to do that. And some actors act on it. They have to be right in the first character. What did Daniel Day-Lewis' wife say? She had to live with Abraham Lincoln for 2 years or something like that. You know what I'm saying? But I don't use that policy. What I try to do is I use that acting and define some sort of place where my technique in terms of acting is that before it depends on whether it's film or stage. Before I get in front of a camera, I usually work on the material the night before. So I want it right at the crest of my memory, right at the outer part of my brain. So I don't make any particular judgments about what my behavior is going to be. Learning the word and the association with behavior. So I don't make just I'm going to say the line this way, I'm going to say the line that. So I have it right there. So when I have enough of it, it comes organically. The words come out, or the words and the behavior have a kind of organic flow through it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Don't worry about learning lines. You'll learn lines. The human mind is incredible. You know, I mean, it is amazing. You'll learn lines if you wouldn't be an actor. But worry about where do you find the internal? I work from the inside out, you know, and it could be anything. Man, I did a movie where I played a serial killer, and I was trying to find a place called Switchback. I was trying to find a core, because serial killers are sociopaths. You know what I'm saying? And they could be the most nicest guys you want to see. So I started taking Pilates. This is 19. I was in there. They wanted to. I mean, I was trying to feel a core, find a core. It's funny, but do you want it? And the person said, "How you going to connect being a serial killer with being?" But I got in the place where I wanted to be. In my what's the name? You know, in the what's come? You know, or I find a story. Or music. You know, I find music sometimes or whatever. Or when I worked on Beloved, it was challenging. I mean, I would cry, you know. Then I found in the shoes and the clothes I wear, I had a story for every single thing. The scarf I had, I made a story for where I got that from, where I took that off. And when one time I took the jacket off a dead man on my way up from the whatchamacallit. So all these kind of ways, it didn't happen. It happened for me, and what that was like, taking it off a man who was dead and everything. All that was that. So all I was invested in the story. So each time I would go to the set, I feel my body in the story. Each time I would go there, I feel my body in the story, in the shoes. And the shoes were kind of shoes, they're not the shoes that we wear like this, but they're the shoes that you wear in that time in the what's the name, and what they felt like. And all those things, investing that much in that, and whatever comes out of that is an organic response.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. That was an amazing question. It was a great way for us to end because it allowed you to talk about this intuitive process, this creative process of yours, and how you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And we're grateful to you for that. So thank you for being here with us.
There's a, I've had the opportunity to, in my opinion, represent the greatest people in the world, my people. So, that's all I say. I've had the opportunity in my life to give service to that. And extending that, and beyond that, beyond them, and them specifically, but humanity and all. I've had that opportunity to be there, to understand what they feel in their own pain, what they feel in their own joy, what they feel when that, and imagine, that. And a lot of it, I see in the faces of just ordinary people. Just people who walk, who do the things, who try to find some sort of place where their humanity shines, and that's my people.
Thank you. Let's thank Danny Glover.